This is a very interesting story because Jesus was actually going through his own personal storm. He had got news that his cousin, John the Baptist, had been very cruelly beheaded, and he tried to withdraw on a boat by himself, but the crowd actually followed him. And he had compassion on this crowd and ended up feeding the thousands, and yet he still needed time to process. So we pick the story up in Matthew chapter 14. And it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went on a mountainside by himself to pray. And so he needed time to pray and process his own private storm. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, being buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So a lot of time had actually passed, and they were facing this buffeting from the waves and the wind. Actually, only shortly before dawn, so a couple of hours, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Now he's in the middle of the storm. He doesn't quieten, he could. He's the creator of the universe. He could have quietened the lake to make it more comfortable to walk over the waves and to walk through the storm. But he's not threatened by the storm at all. He's not under the storm. He's not under the circumstances. He simply walks on top of the waves. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. Now, they had never seen anyone walking on water, so it's totally justifiable that they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, crying out in fear. But immediately Jesus said to them, take courage. It is I, do not be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come out on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. So Jesus is the one who tells Peter to come. And again, he doesn't make it smoother and easier for Peter. He doesn't cause the wind to stop so that Peter, on his first trial of walking on the water, would have an easier experience. He just says, come, right in the middle of the storm. Sadly, when we think about Peter, and I don't know if you've ever seen pictures painted about this story, but we tend to always think about him sort of sinking. But he actually walked on the water towards Jesus. Now, none of the other disciples got out the boat. They stayed in their comfort zone. Peter's the only one who could write on his resume, I walked on water. He's the only one who decided, I'm not just going to know all of these spiritual ideas in my mind. I want to apply them. I want this faith to be real. I have to ask myself, and maybe I can ask you the question, what would our lives be like if fear did not inhibit us? Sometimes we allow fear to confine our lives. For instance, if we're afraid of people's opinions, we might not speak up. Or if we have a fear of confined spaces, we might find ourselves not ever even traveling. Courage does not mean that there's no fear. Actually, courage is doing something when you are afraid. It's not the end of Peter's story. The sinking is not the thing that should define him. It's the fact that he actually got out the boat and walked on the water is what we should remember him for, and that's what should define him. And when Peter calls out, he saw, the Bible says that he saw the wind. Now, you can't actually see the wind, but you can see the effects of the wind. And so as he saw the waves, he was filled with fear. Immediately, Jesus doesn't let him sink and, treading water for a while. He immediately reaches out his hand and he catches him. And he says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now, we might think that Jesus' tone was scolding and full of shame, for goodness sake, Peter, what is wrong with you? But I don't think that was Jesus' tone at all. He didn't hesitate. In fact, the Message Bible says this, he reached down and grabbed his hand and said, faint heart, what got into you? Jesus wasn't pointing fingers at Peter. I think he was pleased with Peter that Peter had actually got out the boat. But he was like, come on, you can do better. You can grow in your faith. And it did bring Peter closer to Jesus. Charles Spurgeon, who actually struggled with anxiety, wrote these words, I have learned to kiss the wave that throws me against the rock of ages. And then what happened? They walked back to the boat on the water. Amazing. Then the Bible says, when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. It's such a beautiful picture of when Jesus gets into your boat, how all the storms and everything else just calms down. And then the story ends in worship. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. In the last storm we learnt about, they ended up saying, who is this? That even the winds and the waves would obey him. And now they say, they don't go, who is this? They say, truly, you are the Son of God. And in these storms, we gain a greater revelation of who God is. But the key is not to take our eyes off Jesus and look at the circumstances and the waves, but at all times to keep our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the perfecter of our faith.